December 1989, 2 weeks before Christmas. Laura Evans, a 39-year-old fashion designer living in Sun Valley, Idaho, is living what most people would call a dream life. She's successful, she's adventurous, she's married to her husband, Roger. She designs sportswear, publishes fashion forecast reports, and spends her free time swimming, skiing, running, and hiking in the mountains she loves. But right now, sitting in a doctor's office, Laura's world is collapsing. She'd found a lump in her breast months earlier. The first mammogram showed nothing. The doctor sent her home with those magic words every patient wants to hear. No problem. It doesn't show anything. Go home. So she did, happily, naively. But when she found a second lump, something in her gut told her this was different. This was real. This was bad. The tests came back. Breast cancer. Aggressive. Advanced. Stage 3. But it got worse. Much worse. 11 lymph nodes were positive. The cancer had spread extensively through her lymphatic system. In 1989, before many of today's targeted therapies existed, this was essentially a death sentence. Her surgeon looked her in the eye and said something most doctors wouldn't dare say today. You need to start living each day as if it were your last. Think about that for a second. Your doctor telling you to prepare to die. At 39 years old, Laura later described her reaction perfectly. I felt like I was in the middle of one of those World War II movies where the bombs are falling and you're running, but you don't know which way to go. But here's what separated Laura from many cancer patients. She didn't just accept the prognosis. She got angry, she got determined, and she started making phone calls. Laura and her husband Roger made endless calls to oncologists across the country. They researched clinical trials. They looked for experimental treatments. They refused to accept that 39 was old enough to die, and they found something radical, something experimental, something that might kill her, but might also save her life. An experimental protocol combining intensive chemotherapy with a bone marrow transplant. In 1989, bone marrow transplants for breast cancer were highly controversial. The procedure was brutal. The mortality rate was significant. But Laura's cancer was so aggressive that conventional treatment offered little hope. She became one of the first people in the United States to undergo this experimental protocol for breast cancer. The treatment plan was terrifying. 2 surgeries, 3 months of outpatient chemotherapy, then the transplant itself, requiring 2 months in the hospital, 7 weeks of that in complete isolation, then 7 weeks of radiation after hospital discharge. Most people would hear that treatment plan and give up. Laura signed the consent forms. But before she started treatment, Laura did something that would define the rest of her life. She thought about a recent trek she'd done in Nepal. She remembered standing on those mountain trails, breathing the thin air, feeling small against the massive Himalayan peaks. And she made herself a promise. If she survived this, she would climb again. She would return to the mountains. She would prove that cancer could take her health, but it couldn't take her spirit. She didn't know it yet, but that promise would eventually save not just her life, but the lives of thousands of other women facing the same nightmare. The chemotherapy was brutal. 3 months of outpatient treatment that left Laura weak, nauseous, and watching her hair fall out in clumps. But that was just the warm-up. Early 1990, Laura was admitted to the hospital for the bone marrow transplant. If you've never heard of what this procedure involves, let me walk you through it, because what Laura went through is almost unimaginable. First, they harvested her bone marrow, the soft tissue inside bones that produces blood cells. They needed to save some of her healthy marrow before they destroyed everything. Then came what doctors euphemistically call conditioning. What it actually means is, we're going to give you so much chemotherapy that we destroy your entire immune system. Intentionally. They gave Laura massive doses of chemotherapy, doses so high they would kill not just cancer cells, but also all the healthy bone marrow that produces white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, everything. The goal? Destroy everything, including any hidden cancer cells, then transplant the saved marrow back to rebuild her immune system from scratch. But here's the terrifying part. For weeks after the conditioning chemotherapy, Laura would have essentially no immune system. Zero. A common cold could kill her. A minor infection could turn septic in hours. She needed to be in complete isolation. Laura spent 7 weeks in a sterile isolation room, and when she says closet-sized, she means it. A tiny room. No visitors without full protective gear. No fresh flowers. The bacteria could kill her. No fresh fruit. Nothing from the outside world. 7 weeks. Alone. Barely able to move. Watching her body waste away. The chemotherapy ravaged her system. Her lungs filled with fluid. She developed pneumonia, one of the most dangerous complications for a transplant patient with no immune system. Laura almost died in that room. She later wrote, "For the first time, I came to understand the release that comes with death." It would have been so easy to just let go, but she didn't let go. And here's why. At night, as the sedatives took hold to relieve her discomfort, Laura would visualize. She'd close her eyes and see herself standing on top of a mountain peak, arms thrust defiantly toward the sky. Victorious, alive, free. That vision, that mental image of herself on a summit, became her lifeline. When the pain was unbearable, she'd go to that mountain. When she wanted to give up, she'd see herself standing at the top. It wasn't just a daydream, it was a survival strategy. The bone marrow eventually engrafted. Her immune system began to rebuild, cell by microscopic cell. After 2 months in the hospital, Laura was finally discharged. But she wasn't cured. She wasn't even close to healthy. She was skeletal, weak, barely able to walk 4 blocks without getting winded. The day she left the hospital, Laura did something symbolic. She walked those 4 blocks, the maximum she could manage. And at the end of that walk, even though she was exhausted and in pain, she raised her arms high over her head. Behind her, the hospital was a shadow. Ahead of her, somewhere in the distance, were mountains. Walking 4 blocks shouldn't be a victory, but for Laura Evans in 1990, it was Everest. Her body had been through hell. The transplant had saved her life, but it had cost her almost everything physically. She'd lost massive amounts of muscle mass. She had chronic pain from the treatment. She'd gone through early menopause. Her hair was gone. Her energy was gone. Most cancer survivors would focus on just staying alive. Maybe gentle walks, maybe some light yoga. Laura had a different plan. She wanted to climb mountains. Her doctors thought she'd lost her mind. Her family worried she was in denial about her physical limitations. But Laura understood something they didn't. She wasn't trying to climb mountains despite the cancer. She was climbing because of it. The cancer had taken everything from her. Her health, her hair, her sense of security, her certainty about the future. She needed to take something back. She needed to prove to herself that she was still Laura, still the adventurer, still alive. So she started training, 1 step at a time, literally. At first, she could barely walk a mile, then 2 miles, then 5. She started hiking local trails around Sun Valley, gentle slopes that healthy people would consider easy warm-ups. But for Laura, each trail was a mountain. Each hike was a victory. 1992, 2 years after her transplant, Laura set her sights on something ambitious, Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. At 19,341 feet, it's the highest peak in Africa. It's not a technical climb, no ropes or ice axes needed, but the altitude is real. The challenge is real. Laura trained for months. She hiked. She did cardiovascular training. She slowly built back the strength that chemotherapy had stolen. And in 1992, Laura Evans stood on the summit of Kilimanjaro. Think about that. 2 years earlier, she couldn't walk 4 blocks. Now she was standing at 19,341 feet, on top of Africa. But something else happened during that Kilimanjaro climb. Something that would change not just Laura's life, but the lives of thousands of women. As Laura climbed, she thought about all the other women fighting breast cancer. The women sitting in chemotherapy infusion centers, watching poison drip into their veins. The women who'd lost their hair, their breasts, their sense of themselves as women. The women who felt isolated and alone. Laura had started a cancer support group in Sun Valley after her recovery. For 2 years, she'd facilitated meetings, helping women rebuild themselves emotionally and physically. But she wanted to do more. She wanted to make a bigger statement. She wanted to show the world that breast cancer didn't have to be the end of the story. And she had an idea, a crazy, ambitious, impossible idea. What if she could organize a climb of one of the world's highest mountains with a team made entirely of breast cancer survivors? Not athletes who happened to have cancer, not experienced climbers who'd been diagnosed, but ordinary women, mothers, grandmothers, young women, old women, who'd all faced death and somehow survived. Women who'd never climbed anything higher than a staircase. Women who would prove that surviving cancer meant you could survive anything. 1993. Laura Evans founded the Expedition Inspiration Fund for Breast Cancer Research. The mission? Climb a major mountain with breast cancer survivors to raise awareness and research funding. Now she just needed to figure out which mountain, how to fund it, and how to find women crazy enough to join her. Laura needed help. She needed someone who actually knew how to climb big mountains safely, someone with credibility in the mountaineering world, someone who wouldn't dismiss her idea as crazy. She found Peter Whitaker. Peter Whitaker was a legend in American mountaineering, premier international mountain guide, founder of Summits Adventure Travel. He'd climbed all over the world. He had the experience, the skills, and the contacts to make something like this work. Laura pitched him the idea. Aconcagua, Argentina, 22,841 feet, the highest peak in the Western Hemisphere, and a team of breast cancer survivors. Most guides would have said no. Too dangerous, too risky. These women had no climbing experience. Some of them were still in treatment. It was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Peter said yes. He didn't just say yes. He embraced the project completely. He picked the mountain. He named the expedition Expedition Inspiration, and he started working on logistics. But they had a problem: money. Organizing an international expedition isn't cheap. You need permits, flights, equipment, guides, porters, base camp support. They were looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Enter JanSport. JanSport, the outdoor equipment company, agreed to underwrite the entire cost of the expedition. They donated $300,000. Other outdoor companies joined in. The climbing community rallied around Laura's vision. Now Laura just needed her team. She put out a call. Breast cancer survivors wanted for mountain climbing expedition. No experience necessary. Must be medically cleared. Must be willing to train for over a year. Must be ready to push your body and mind further than you ever thought possible. The response was overwhelming. Women applied from across the country. Young women in their 20s, grandmothers in their 60s, single women, married women, mothers, professional athletes, complete beginners. What they all had in common: they'd all faced death from breast cancer, and they'd all decided that wasn't good enough. Laura assembled her team. 17 women, ages ranging from 21 to 62. Some had just finished treatment. One woman, Annette Porter from Seattle, was still undergoing chemotherapy when she made a training climb of Mount Rainier with the group. Think about that. This woman was getting chemotherapy, poison dripping into her veins to kill cancer, and she was climbing mountains. The training began. The team climbed Mount Rainier as a shakedown. They hiked. They trained with weighted packs. They learned to walk while roped together. They practiced using ice axes. But more importantly, they bonded. These women, who'd never met before, discovered they were sisters. They'd all been through hell. They all understood the fear, the pain, the isolation of cancer in ways that even loving families couldn't fully grasp. They stayed up late sharing stories, crying together, laughing together, supporting each other. One of the youngest team members, 22-year-old Ashley Cox, had never been in a support group. She'd felt completely alone with her diagnosis. Suddenly, she was surrounded by women who understood. The media started paying attention. This wasn't just a feel-good story. This was real. This was powerful. These women were doing something that would inspire millions. January 1995. The team flew to Argentina. 17 breast cancer survivors. Peter Whitaker and his guide team. All the equipment, all the hope, all the determination. Mount Aconcagua was waiting. Mendoza, Argentina, January 1995. The expedition inspiration team stood at the base of Aconcagua, staring up at 22,841 feet of rock, ice, and thin air. For most of these women, this was the biggest physical challenge they'd ever faced, and they were facing it with bodies that had been ravaged by cancer and chemotherapy. Aconcagua isn't technically difficult. You don't need ropes for most of the route. You don't need advanced ice climbing skills. But it's brutal in other ways. The altitude alone defeats about 40% of climbers who attempt it. The weather can turn deadly in minutes. The sheer physical endurance required is immense. And these were cancer survivors, women whose bodies had been through hell. The climb strategy was careful and methodical. You don't just walk straight up a 22,000-foot mountain. You have to acclimatize, climb high, sleep low, let your body adapt to the decreasing oxygen. It's a chess game with your own physiology. Base camp, Camp 1, Camp 2. Each camp higher, each night colder, each breath harder. At high altitude, simple tasks become exhausting. Eating feels like a chore. Sleep is nearly impossible. Your body is slowly shutting down from lack of oxygen. Altitude sickness, pounding headaches, nausea, dizziness is almost inevitable. But these women had been through worse. Chemotherapy is its own kind of altitude sickness, its own kind of physical hell. They knew how to suffer. They knew how to keep going when their bodies screamed at them to stop. As they climbed higher, something remarkable happened. These women, who'd spent months or years feeling weak, feeling like victims, feeling less than whole, started feeling strong again. Every step up the mountain was a step away from the hospital, away from the cancer wards, away from the fear and the pain and the helplessness. Camp 3, nearly 20,000 feet. The air is thin. Food tastes like cardboard. Some team members were struggling with altitude sickness. The guides were watching everyone carefully, ready to make the call to send anyone down who was in danger. But Laura and her team kept climbing. February 4th, 1995, Summit Day. They woke at 2 a.m. in darkness and bitter cold. The temperature was well below 0 Fahrenheit. The plan: reach the summit in the early morning before afternoon storms could move in. In the darkness, all you can see is the headlamp of the climber in front of you. One step. Breathe. Another step. Breathe. At this altitude, you're getting roughly half the oxygen you'd get at sea level. Every movement feels like you're walking through water. The hours blurred together. Step. Breathe. Step. Breathe. Some of the women were moving slower than others. The guides were patient but watchful. At this altitude, you can't stay up here long. Get to the summit, take your photos, get down. Staying high too long is deadly. The final push is called the Canaleta, a steep couloir filled with loose rock and scree. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It goes on forever. This is where strong climbers break, where willpower becomes everything. Laura was climbing, 1 step at a time, just like in the hospital, just like learning to walk again, just like every day of recovery. 1 step, then another, then another. And then, at approximately 10 a.m. on February 5th, 1995, Laura Evans stood on the summit of Aconcagua. She raised her arms to the sky, tears streaming down her face. One by one, the other women reached the summit. 17 breast cancer survivors, all of them standing at 22,841 feet. At the top of the Western Hemisphere, they unfurled their expedition flags. They embraced, they cried, they celebrated. Laura stood at the summit and said words that would be broadcast around the world. We stand here in honor of all women who have suffered through breast cancer as we have. The summit photos show women laughing, crying, hugging. But if you look closely at their faces, you see something else. You see strength. You see pride. You see women who've reclaimed themselves. The descent was long and exhausting. Coming down a mountain is often more dangerous than going up. You're tired, your knees hurt, The loose rock is treacherous, but the entire team made it down safely. When they emerged from the shadow of Aconcagua, they were different people. They'd proven something to themselves and to the world. Cancer survivors aren't victims. They're warriors. The world was watching. The Expedition Inspiration climb made headlines across the United States and internationally. PBS created a documentary about the climb. The team was invited to the White House, where they were honored by Hillary Clinton and Sandra Day O'Connor. But more importantly, the climb touched something deep in the breast cancer community. Letters poured in from women all over the country, women who were sitting in chemotherapy chairs, watching the poison drip into their veins, feeling weak and helpless. Women who'd lost their hair, their breasts, their sense of themselves. These women wrote to Laura saying things like, "If you can climb a mountain, I can get through chemo. If you can climb a mountain, I can go out and walk a few blocks." That was the real victory, not the summit, the message. The message was, cancer diagnosis doesn't mean your life is over. You can still have goals. You can still have dreams. You can still do incredible things. Laura turned Expedition Inspiration into a movement. The foundation continued organizing climbs and hikes, giving cancer survivors goals to train for during recovery. They organized an annual symposium bringing together the world's top breast cancer researchers to share unpublished findings and collaborate on new treatments. Over the next 5 years, the Expedition Inspiration Fund raised over $2 million for breast cancer research. But Laura didn't stop climbing. She continued pursuing her own summits. She climbed Mount Elbrus in Russia, Europe's highest peak at 18,510 feet. She climbed Denali in Alaska, North America's highest peak at 20,310 feet. She trekked in Nepal near Mount Kanchenjunga. In 1996, Laura was selected to carry the Olympic torch on its route to the Atlanta Olympics. She was inducted into the Explorers Club of New York, one of the most prestigious honors in the exploration community. She published her book, The Climb of My Life, in 1996, dedicating the proceeds to breast cancer research. Laura became a sought-after speaker, traveling the country sharing her story, not to brag about climbing mountains, but to inspire others to face their own challenges, to find their own mountains, whether literal or metaphorical. She returned to her first passion, fashion design, but now with a deeper purpose. Everything she did was infused with the lessons she'd learned from cancer and from mountains. Laura Evans spent 5 years after Aconcagua living fully, climbing mountains, helping others, making a difference. And then, in a cruel twist of irony, in October 2000, Laura Evans died. Not from breast cancer. She'd beaten that. She died from a malignant brain tumor, completely unrelated to the breast cancer she'd survived. She was 51 years old. Here's what we need to understand about Laura Evans's story. She didn't climb Aconcagua to conquer a mountain. She climbed it to reclaim herself, to prove that cancer could take her health, but not her spirit, not her dreams, not who she was at her core. She didn't die from breast cancer. She beat it. She survived 11 years after a diagnosis that gave her a 15% chance of being alive in 5 years. But more than that, she used those 11 years to change the world. Today, the Expedition Inspiration Fund continues Laura's work. They still organize climbs. They still fund research. They still bring together the world's top scientists at the Laura Evans Memorial Breast Cancer Symposium, held biennially in Sun Valley, Idaho. Thousands of breast cancer survivors have participated in Expedition Inspiration climbs and hikes over the past 30 years, each one finding their own strength, each one discovering that they're stronger than they knew. The research grants funded by Expedition Inspiration have contributed to breakthroughs in breast cancer treatment. Women today have treatment options that didn't exist in Laura's time. Survival rates have improved dramatically. Laura's legacy isn't just the mountains she climbed. It's the mountains she helped other people climb. Here's what Laura wanted you to know. She wrote it herself. Too often we walk through life unconsciously. There is, in reality, no time to waste. Now is the time to go for it. She also wrote, 10 years from now I won't look back and say, I wish I had blank. 10 years from now, I'll have a new wish list of all the great adventures yet to come. Laura didn't get those 10 years, but she got 11 years after a diagnosis that should have killed her. And she used every single one of those years to live fully, to help others, to make a difference. So here's my question for you, sitting there watching this video. What's your mountain? Maybe you're facing cancer right now. Maybe you're facing something else, a diagnosis, a loss, a setback that feels insurmountable. Or maybe you're healthy and comfortable, but you've given up on dreams because they seemed too hard, too scary, too impossible. Laura's message is simple. Start climbing. You don't have to summit Aconcagua. You just have to take one step, then another, then another. Find something that matters to you. Find something worth fighting for. Find your own mountain, whether it's a literal peak or a personal goal or a challenge you've been avoiding, and start climbing, one step at a time. Because if a woman who spent 7 weeks in isolation, who had her entire immune system destroyed and rebuilt, who was given a 15% chance of survival, could stand on top of the highest peak in the Western Hemisphere, then what's your excuse? Laura Evans proved that cancer might take your hair, your strength, your certainty about tomorrow, but it can't take your summit.